Long before the conception of the American colonies, capital punishment was enforced in early societies across the world. Ingrained in ancient cultures such as the Code of King Hammurabi of Babylon, capital punishment methods were merciless. For methods of backbreaking, boiling to death, dismemberment, and flaying of the skin, these brutal tactics were designed to instill fear in civilians. But is fear really enough to stop violent crimes? The death penalty has evolved over time, but fundamental issues still remain that make capital punishment an unacceptable form of justice. Because of high-volume crime rates in states, despite the possibility of capital punishment, real-life horror stories of botched executions, the financial burdens of enforcing the death penalty, and the sobering fact that race and economic status does play a direct role in the decision of capital punishment, the death penalty should be abolished in all 50 states. One of the main reasons that states still implement the death penalty today is their belief in the deterrence theory, which suggests that the looming threat of capital punishment reduces the percentage of violent crimes per state. However, the latest issue of the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology conducted a study of leading criminology experts' opinions on the deterrence theory, and an overwhelming 88.2% of the respondents did not believe that the death penalty could be attributed to a lack of violent crimes. On the contrary, a survey conducted by the New York Times in 2016 shows that out of the 12 states that do not enforce capital punishment, 10 of those states have lower homicide rates than the states that do utilize the death penalty. While startling, these findings can possibly be explained by the fact that the majority of scheduled executions do not get carried out. Since capital punishment was reinstated in 1976, 8,734 people have been put on death row, and out of those 8,734 people, only 2,656 were actually executed. If one of the death penalty's main purposes is to make civilians fearful of its consequences, how can it possibly be effective if not even a third of the guilty defendants receive their punishment? Besides the holes in the deterrence theory, many of the methods of execution are inhumane or are not properly administered, causing cruel and unusual punishment to the recipient. Simply put, a botched execution takes place when there is a breach from the protocol in the administration of a certain method of executions. Botched executions have taken place as recently as 2018, but perhaps one of the most notoriously botched cases in American history took place in Delaware in 2005, commonly known as the burning end. The defendant Brian Steckel was administered with a lethal injection, but the machine used to insert the dosage into his veins malfunctioned. The IV became blocked and the secondary sedative did not release, leaving Steckel completely conscious as the poison penetrated his bloodstream. As the deadly potassium chloride spread through Steckel's defenseless body, the harrowing pain that he experienced is best described as having his veins lit on fire. Instead of receiving the quick, humane death that Brian was entitled to, this human being spent his final moments on Earth enduring physical agony that no person, regardless of their actions, deserves to face. Beyond lethal injections, guilty defendants have faced torturous deaths through the years due to unexpected malfunctions during executions. In Florida in 1997, Pedro Medina met a gruesome end while facing the electric chair, but the electrocution was not what killed him. While the electric shocks began to consume Pedro's body, his mask caught fire. After 4 excruciating minutes, Pedro finally died after his entire face had been engulfed in flames. While the argument can be made that these botched executions happened years ago when the states did not have access to the same technology and equipment that they have today, these ungodly executions should have never happened in the first place. How can we scoff at ancient societies for using brutal execution tactics such as stoning and dismemberment when American inmates are suffering fates that are arguably just as brutal? Accidental or not, there is no room for botched executions within a system that entitles all death row inmates to a humane end. An aspect of the death penalty that is less severe than the premise of botched executions, but is nevertheless crucial in exemplifying the shortcomings of capital punishment, is the financial burden that it imposes on the states. According to a study conducted by the Kansas Judicial Council in 2017, defending a death penalty case costs up to 4 times more than a non-death penalty case. Additionally, citing Richard C. Dieter of the Nonpartisan Death Penalty Information Center, Fox News reported that death penalty trials cost an estimated $1 million more than a case in which the prosecutor seeks life without parole, and housing prisoners on death row can cost up to twice as many times as housing general population prisoners. Because costs related to capital punishment and prison upkeep gets absorbed by the states, it is the American people that end up paying for these mountainous expenses. It is completely unreasonable to expect American citizens to pay for a system that not only fails to carry out 70% of executions, but a system that time and time again allows inmates to suffer cruel and unusual punishment, violating a principle that has been a core part of America's foundation since the publication of the English Bill of Rights. Perhaps one of the most frightening reasons that supports the abolition of the death penalty is how unproportionate the amount of executions are in terms of the ethnicity of the victim and of the defendant. Since 1976, African Americans have accounted for 43% of all executions, and while white people have accounted for only half of all murder victims, 80% of all capital cases involve white victims. Additionally, as of 2002, 12 people that identify as Caucasian have been executed for murdering an African American victim, while 178 African Americans have been executed for killing white victims. Considering that external and uncontrollable factors, such as ethnicity, weigh so heavily in the determination of whether a human being lives or dies, capital punishment cannot be an option. In the United States, the most common reason that citizens support the death penalty is the principle of an eye for an eye, having the punishment fit the crime. A major issue with using the punishment fits the crime logic is that the death penalty is carried out under the assumption that inmates will not face cruel and unusual punishment during execution, when in reality, botched executions do slip through the cracks. Using the eye for an eye thought process cannot be an option in the United States justice system because of the sobering fact that innocent people have been sentenced to die. Since 1973, 167 people have been released from death row across 26 states because of new forensic technologies that led investigators to the realization that the convicted killer was in fact innocent. It is very easy to read a number like 167 and feel unmoved, considering how small that number is in relation to America's population. Numbers have the ability to dehumanize a statistic as damning as this, so think for a moment of all of your friends, family, colleagues, and fellow classmates. Try replacing the number 167 with familiar faces: your mom, your best friend, your college roommate, your grandfather. Suddenly, 167 does not seem like such a small number, does it? Couple that terrifying image with the fact that over the past 40 years, more than half of the innocent people that have been sentenced to die have not been accounted for, and the seemingly small margin of error becomes an absolutely horrifying feat. On paper, capital punishment can seem logical. However, the death penalty is one of the most hypocritical components of the U.S. Bill of Rights. History has uncovered gruesome and discriminatory issues with how the death penalty is enforced and how the defendants come to be found guilty that blatantly contradict the core values of our nation: life and liberty. There is no liberty in delivering executions that cause the defendant's last moments on earth to be filled with excruciating pain. There is no liberty in having American citizens pay for a system that does not carry out what it promises to do. There is no liberty in allowing for the favorability of life based on ethnicity, and there is no liberty in a system that deprives an innocent human being the chance to live. We cannot undo the botched executions of the past or grant wrongly convicted defendants the years that they lost behind bars. But through the abolition of the death penalty in all 50 states, we can ensure that life and liberty ring true in our justice system.